So this is the first of my Walstad method tanks. I've set it up as it was more of an experiment to see how it got on long term. I wasn't focused so much on what it looked like the day I set it up or how it evolved at the beginning. It was more of an experiment to see how it do over time. Now, I really want to see how the tank evolves in the long term, what it sees to look like after year 1, year 2. Really interested in all that stuff. So what I tend to find is, I'm going off on a tangent a bit, but I want to share my journey with me dirted tanks, me Walstad tanks, and over the years, and just so people get an idea of what I do, how I set them up, and then I want to move on to the reason why I've set them up. I want to just run them as a really simple planted tank, but they're not really simple. I find there's a lot of people online telling they don't know what they're doing, and they're talking about the topic like they're an authority on the topic, and they don't touch on the basics. And I just think to myself, I end up going back and making the same sort of videos over and over, explaining the basics and trying to touch on the basic topics, and then I get comments saying I'm wrong, I should be doing this, should be doing that, and the information where a lot of it is people who basically they don't understand the basics of a planted tank, any sort of planted tank, and then they're talking about dirted tanks they're really simple, and they don't touch on the basics of a planted tank. They talk about stuff like balance, but then never mention the basics like light, CO2 and nutrients. These are the basics of a planted tank. It doesn't matter what style of planted tank it is. Dirted tanks aren't they're not their own thing. They're just a planted tank. They're not special in any way. The only way they are is that they produce nutrients. So, you're not looking at having to fertilise, which that's what suits me. Is I work unsociable hours, I work shift work, so sometimes I find it hard to dose nutrients on a regular basis. So then I start getting swings, especially when I'm running the likes of CO2. So these type of tanks appeal to me, and one of the reasons why they appeal to me is because I'm collecting rainbows at the moment and really enjoying rainbow tanks, and that's they appreciate a heavily planted tank. So as I say, this is my first tank, and I set it up for 2 reasons. The first reason was, as I say, I wanted to plant I can't find locally any dwarf sage. Now I'm quite looking at this sage thinking it doesn't necessarily strike me as dwarf sage. It kind of strikes me as regular sage. Dwarf sage I've had in the past been that big, and it's never got any bigger, but this is good 6 inches long, maybe a foot long in some places. So I'm thinking, is this dwarf sage or is it regular sage? I don't know. So it's left me kind of conflicted about this tank, because the sage has grown out, and I'm not using the term dwarf sage because I'm not really convinced it is dwarf sage. The size of it, I mean, I've got dwarf sage that's absolutely tiny by comparison, so I don't know that. And then there's the fact that I wanted to see how the tank does in the long term. I was expecting the sage to take a long time to grow in, and it's gone right around the tank in 6 months. Obviously we're coming up to about 7 months, and the sage is absolutely coated the bottom of the tank already, and the tank's absolutely full of it. So I'm thinking, what do we do? Do we do a reset and get the sage out, get the sage in a bigger tank? I've got an excess of sage I can play with now and do other things with. So I'm kind of open to people's opinion. What do you think I should do? Do you think I should break the tank down, start again, reset this, and then use the sage again and use the sage somewhere else as well? I don't know. I'm in 2 minds. But so here's the tank with the light on now. You can see the dirt layer there. You can see the dirt, you can see the cap, and then you can see this layer here where all the gases, it's processing all the however you don't define them, anaerobic, anoxic gases. But I just thought it'd be cool to show you that as these anaerobic gases come up and they come into the oxygenated environment, it processes these gases. But you want that happening down here, don't you? I talk about it all the time. But that's, I just enjoy showing you that. I wanted to kind of highlight this, and notice where the plant roots are, and it's brown, where it's brown above, and then the plant roots kind of break it up, and it changes the, sorry, that's, you can kind of see where the black anaerobic, where the gases are being processed, and then you can see where the plant roots are, and it completely changes, which I find really interesting. It's obviously creating different chemical processes or different biological processes in the substrate, which I thought would be interesting to see. Kind of seeing like a little yellowy tint in the water. Now this is the buildup of dissolved organic compounds or carbons, and they're really beneficial to a planted tank. It helps the plants trap and absorb the likes of heavy metals, nutrients in the water. So it's interesting to see them build, and that's another reason why, like, I'm thinking, do it. I'm in two minds. Do it, shut the tank down, get the sedge out, or do it let it keep going, because I'd like to see how it goes long term. And this water, the matured Walstad type water, is it's got a lot of benefits to it. So if it did get rid of the tank, they would keep the water and add that to a different tank and let it mature. I'm not sure. This is my second, well, it's my third data tanker set up. It's the second on the list, and this is the one I like. I really appreciate this tank. I really like this tank. Obviously, I've done this slightly differently, where I've got big plants at the back and I've got small crypts at the front. There's a few big crypts, like this Balance, Walker Eye, and then that one there you can see coming up, that's a crypt Apongigita, and then I've got the lilies. Seems up, obviously that one's a Crenum Calamostratum. I really enjoy this tank. I kind of set the substrate up a little bit differently in this tank. I used a 70% peat moss, and then 20% organic potting soil and 10% agricultural grit to kind of break the soil up, let the oxygen get down there. And yeah, the only problem is you can see some of the Amazon sword leaves, or they're like stripped. Now, I had to house some peppermint bristlenose plecos in here, and I noticed for like 6 months the Amazon sword was flying. For example, that leaf there, this leaf on this side coming up on the inside, and that one there, they've both grown this week, and there's a third one coming up, and that's all growing in the space of about a week. And the Amazon sword was absolutely fine. All the leaves looked like this until I put the peppermint bristlenose in, and then a lot of them ended up like this pretty fast. And I often find the peppermints like grazing on them, but there was one and a pup. There was an Amazon sword and a pup when I first got the thing, and now if you look here, it's got a big runner coming over, and there's an absolute ton of baby swords. There's probably about 8 baby swords all on that stem that I could take off and replant, but I haven't really got anywhere I want to put Amazon swords at the moment, so kind of just left them be as it is. And then obviously I've got dwarf lilies. So while we're here, should we do a top 5 plants that I'd recommend? So you want a foreground plant, like I think like crypts, get them in there. Obviously if you're using soil, then you want to maximize with plants. If there's soil underneath, there's no point having soil releasing nutrients and nothing absorbing them nutrients. The soil may as well not be there. I never use hardscape, so top 5 plants that I'd recommend. Number 1 is crypts, or Sage is like a foreground plant to get in there, so you still got definition, you still got free space above it. And then plant number 2 I'd recommend is Amazon swords. They've got big heavy root feeding roots. When I say heavy root feed, what I mean is they put out a massive fibrous root system that pulls a lot of nutrients out. I'm not saying that they feed, that's debatable, whether they feed more at the nutrient, whether they feed more at the roots than other root feeding plants. That's a debatable topic. But when I say heavy root feeder, I mean the demand it puts on the soil beneath. It puts out a big fibrous root structure, and it's pulling a lot of nutrients out of the substrate. That's what I mean when I say heavy root feeding. It's putting a lot of the demand on the planted substrate. Lilies, I find I haven't had much success with lilies compared to like in old data tanks I've had. Maybe it was beginner's luck. These got the best of both worlds. They'll send leaves up to the top, so they're hacking into the early advantage, they're hacking into the aerial advantage. They're getting CO2 at the surface. They're not limited for CO2, and they've got a big fibrous root structure underneath, which is pulling tons of nutrients out the soil. So it's absolutely perfect for a tank like this. Crenum, if you've got a bigger tank, like crenums are amazing. They're like big bulb, and if you look, there's like loads of little straight leaves at the bottom, and these are actually pups growing. So I started off with one crenum, and I'm growing about 5 around the bottom at the moment. So there's 4 that I'd recommend, and then obviously you need a floating plant. So that's, and the 5th plant I'd recommend is a floating plant. Obviously you need the aerial advantage. So Salvinia, Amazon frogbit, red roof floaters, anything like that, they just do fantastic in a Walstad tank. They pull out all the heavy nutrients and, you know, the part of the process of, so I just let the Amazon frogbit do its thing. I'll move it around tanks and stuff. Salvinia, I'll let it fill in and then I'll pull it out. I'll bin like 50% of it and let it grow back. That's the early advantage. That's doing the heavy work on the pulling any excess nutrients out the water column, keeping, you know, because there's the tanks. Ultimately, you want a low nutrient water column, don't you? And then I've got about 30 Go the river rainbows in here at the moment that I'm growing out. So let's look at that tank. This is a little different to my other tanks. Still running on the same principles, just that there it's a bit milder. It's got a lot of peat moss in there. I was assuming that the reason why I put the peat moss in, one of the main reasons, is because once I do a lot of crypts, I find in my shed the temperature swing. I like the crypts melt a lot in there, so I don't really keep crypts in there. I wouldn't spend the money on crypts to watch them melt and not come back. So this was my chance to grow a lot of crypts, which are one of my favourite plants. So there's that tank. Like, I really appreciate this tank, and I've learned a lot about keeping a small foreground plants. I was saying this to a couple of people the other day, and then I've got a lot of big heavy roof feeding plants at the top. Right guys, and this is the third and final one. This is the second tank I set up, and this is the most textbook Walstad method tank I own. Everything is by the book, and it's been running about 6 months now. And if you go back and have a look at the videos of when I set it up, like, it was like the tank has absolutely exploded with growth. It was, you know, there was a few bits of plants here and there, but you could literally see above all the plants right to the back of the tank, and you can't see any of it now. Now, if I'm honest, I'm kind of considering doing a reset on this tank for a number of reasons. The first of which is to get rid of this valve. It's right the way around the tank now. It's everywhere, and I kind of planted it up and just let it do its thing like you would with a Walstad tank. But the valve's in and amongst everything. It's causing an absolute nightmare to deal with, just for the fact that it grows so fast. So that's the first reason. I think the second reason is there's a lot of like holes in a lot of the leaves here, there and everywhere, and to me they don't look like nutrient deficiency. It looks like damage. And there's an absolute ton of snails. I started the tank with a load of snails, and there's like more in there now, and I'm kind of thinking that they're the culprit. So what I'd like to do is set up, like the last tank you've seen, I'd like to set up a tank with like a few big, like this Amazon sword. It was absolutely tiny, wasn't it, 6 months ago now? It's an absolute unit, and it's doing the same. It's putting out like 1 or 2 massive leaves every week. And the tank's like 18 inches tall, so it's growing like 18-inch long leaves like every week or two. So the lily, it goes through a phase where it'll throw out a ton of leaves, and then they just kind of get nailed. And I'm not convinced it's a nutrient deficiency. I think it's damage off the snails. So because the big holes in the leaves, it looks like it's been eaten. So I'd like to get rid of the snails out of this tank. And the third reason I'd like to shut this tank down is I'm considering setting up another tank. If you look here, I've got 2 different types of rainbows in here. I've got the Bosmoni, which I think there's like 5 females and 1 male in here. And then there's the goiter, not the goiters, they're in the living room. There's the Wapoga red laser rainbows. I can never remember the Latin name, but anyway. So if you notice, there's 8 of them in here. There's 6 which is significantly bigger. They're the ones I bought like 6 months ago, I think it was now. And they've gone absolutely massive compared. There's another 2 in here. Now, they've been sat in the fish shop for... they were all the same batch, and I bought 6, and they've all grown out, but there isn't much colour in them. So I'm assuming the 6 I got were females, and then if we look, there's one of the 2 small ones down there, got a bright red tail. But well, that one, there he is there, just going out. He's just bright red tail, full of colour. He goes blue. He's got laser stripes down him, and I'm thinking, well, I'm guessing he's a male and the rest are females. That's the only logical explanation. What you find with rainbows is the ones that colour up in the shop, everyone buys. So the dull ones are female, usually, and then so the shop ends up with all the females sat there for months. So it can be quite tricky to get males, but hopefully, I've got enough to get breeding. So that's one of the reasons why I'd like to that's the third reason I'd like to set up another tank, and I was thinking of doing another dirted tank. I don't know whether to, what you call it with that tank. I don't know whether to record it, because, as I say, everyone seems to put out videos just setting up dirted tanks, and they're telling you all this stuff. But I don't know, I keep finding I keep going back to basics and saying, look, this is what you should be doing. I find a lot of people talk about the topic like they're an authority figure on it, but they don't go into any of the details. They don't talk about like the likes of the plant nutrition, the bacteria, the substrate, how the substrate works, balancing the tank, watching out for algae, how to deal with algae outbreaks. If you notice, I've got the 3 tanks, and I've been showing them consistently since I set them up, and I haven't had an algae outbreak in any of them. But people will have you believe that every planted dirted tank requires an algae outbreak of some sort as part of the progression. And you've seen my tank since the start. None of them have ever shown a massive algae outbreak in them. I've had a bit of blackbeard algae start on the top of my crenum, which I'm pretty sure I showed you, but I treated that with hydrogen peroxide. Glenn from GB Shrimp talked me through that. Never really dealt with it before, but that's down to fluctuations in CO2 levels from what I read and from what Glenn was saying. So, but yeah, it was pretty easy to deal with, and I found it broke out in a week, and it was gone the week after. So there's no massive issue there. So, but yeah, nice one for helping me out with that, Glenn. Just a 2-minute chat, and we boxed it. So I'm thinking of resetting this tank, so it gives me the chance to get rid of all the val. It's just it's gone absolutely gangbuster in here. It's doing too well for my liking, and I'd like a bit of definition, like I was showing you in the other tank. I'd like to have, obviously, all this is dwarf sag here, right the way along, but then it's got val grown through it. The crinum is knotted with val, so I'd like to get shut of that. This side of the tank isn't too bad with val, because it's it's like swords and apongigetans, and there's a crenum tyanum there, so these can hold their own against val. But the likes of crenum calomestratum, the dwarf lilies, and the sag, I don't really want. I'd like it to be defined, so you've got like the dwarf lilies coming up in that corner, the Amazon swords in this corner, and then at the back here maybe like the apongigetans and the crinums. I don't know. I haven't. But then I'd like the foreground to be just dwarf sag. Obviously, I can't keep crypts alive in here. There's still loads of crypts in the soil, like the rhizomy root structure still in there, and it's still healthy. I've had one up when I've been pulling val out, and I've replanted it, but I don't know what it is. But like, I just get swings in here. I think it's temperature swings because I heat the room, and I don't think the crypts like it, and they melt. So I've had it happen twice, but the crypts in the house have been going 6 months, and they seem fine. So every time I have crypts in the house with a heater, they do well. But out here in the shed, where like the temperature can fluctuate by a degree maybe over a 24-hour period, and if we get a heat wave, it'll go up to I've had the room up to about 27, 28 before in the tank, so not ideal for them. But yeah, if you want me to show you that, like, that's what I want to do with the reset, to make it look a bit more defined. I'm sick of the look of like the jungle tank vibe. Do you know what I mean? Like I'd like a definition. I'd like to be able to show my plants off, and if a plant's doing well, I can show you the plant's doing well. It's not hidden amongst everything. I don't necessarily think data tanks or Walstad tanks need to be as heavily planted as I've done with this. So I'd like to get it stripped down a bit and show off the plants a bit more. And then if you'd like to see me set up a Walstad tank and talk you through the process of setting it up and explaining the soil, what you expect from the soil kind of thing, and what the soil will do. I've talked about it in numerous videos, and then why I choose gravel. If you look at my tanks, every tank I haven't dated has got sand in, but every tank I have dated has got gravel in. Now, that's not a coincidence. Like, I prefer the look of sand, but I know the pitfalls of using sand with dirt. I've explained it. So I'm not gonna tell you all the problems and then cause myself them problems. It's counterintuitive, isn't it? And then the type of plants, I've just talked you through 5 great plants I've got for a Walstad dated tank. I use similar styles of plants in all my tanks. I'm big on like heavy root feeding plants, like I explained before. Like, by heavy root feeding, I mean you put big fibrous root structures out and put a lot of demand on the soil for nutrients. So that's my definition. Like I say, I'd like to talk. I don't know whether people want me to talk through another data tank. If you only put like data tank, planted tank videos out, Walstad tanks, they just talk about the setup and then they don't talk about none of the topics beyond. But like I've said in previous videos, the term method, like scientific method, is a process. It's a way of doing something. It's a way of continuously doing something to achieve an outcome. So if you're talking about a method, then you should be talking about the method, but not just talking about the setup continually. So that's where that's where I'm trying to take my videos on data tanks, planted tanks, is going beyond the setup. Like, I've explained the setup, and then I don't know whether people want me to do it again. If you want me to, I'll do it again and show you, like, because I want to get like a data tank for these Wapoga red lasers, set up a data tank for them, get some Val in there, not Val, just so them get this dwarf sarge. I'd like to get some of the dwarf sarge in there, and then maybe like a posh Amazon sword, like I was looking at Ocelot Reds. There's a few nice ones on a few of the websites. I was thinking maybe one of them on one side, and then on the other, another. I was thinking maybe even have a go with a stem, show you what happens to a stem after 12 months. It just ends up bald in a data tank, unless you prune it and replant it. And I don't think that data tanks, Walstad tanks, are necessarily the most favourable environment for stems, especially when you got, like, you want to use the aerial advantage. You want to use floating plants at the top, so they're kind of competing with each other's stems and floating plants will always win because they've got access to direct CO2 from the atmosphere, and they're right there at the light, and they'll pull all the nutrients out of the water. And then that's like I've said in one of my videos before, that's an early warning sign that your nutrients are becoming deficient in the tank. Your floating plants will start showing nutrient deficiencies, and it's not CO2 because they got access to atmospheric CO2. So it can only be nutrients, either macro or micronutrients, and then you've had an early warning. You can adjust your technique, you can test things, see what's going wrong, and readdress them before your plants in your tank start showing these problems. But I think that's me banging on long enough, kind of going off on a tangent, trying to explain that, like, I'd like to get away from setting these tanks up, talking through the setup constantly, and I feel like I've showed you 3 times the way I set up a Walstad tank and the pitfalls, and talking about balancing them. People use the term balance, ecosystem, natural, like they just use it as buzzwords. They don't add any substance to it. Like, I define what I mean by balance. Obviously, CO2, light, nutrients is balance. It's a balance in any planted tank. So if people are using the word balanced and not defining what they mean by it, like, it doesn't really give us anything to go with. And ecosystem, like I've said in the past, I define ecosystem as the process of fish waste being broken down by the bacteria, and the bacteria releasing nutrients that the plants will uptake. That's my definition of the word ecosystem. That natural nutrient cycle of the fish creating waste, the bacteria processing the waste, and the plants using the nutrients that are processed. Like, I talk about all of it, the gases, the nutrients. That's my definition of ecosystem. And with the term natural, that every tank, in my opinion, either every tank is natural or none of them are. It doesn't matter what you're doing with them. If fundamentally, at the end of the day, they've all got the same beneficial bacteria and doing the same processes. It's just, with some of them, plants are taking up the nutrients, and others, your water changing the nutrients out. Obviously, with the likes of the Walstad method, your water changing to get like certain minerals in the water, and obviously try and diffuse others. And obviously, I've talked about stuff like allelopathy or allelopathy, however you want to pronounce it, which obviously people say it doesn't exist, but there's scientific papers saying it does exist. But then when I mention it, I get told I'm wrong. It's all conjecture. But there's scientific papers talking about it, and I've sent a few scientific papers to a few people, and yeah. So anyway, I've gone on waffling long enough. I thought I'd give you an update on my tanks and tell you where I'm up to and what I want to do next. But like I say, my idea is I want to kind of set up my style of Walstad tanks with clear definition between the big heavy root feeding plants that are down, getting down into the substrate, using that soil, and then the smaller plants with the the likes of the sides, the crypts, as kind of a foreground plant, and they're getting in there and doing a pretty similar job. They'll spread out and carpet, but there'll be a clear definition between the foreground and the background plants, and then the floating plants. Kind of at a point where I want to rid my life of duckweed. Obviously, I feed a lot of it to my goldfish, but I'd like something nicer, salvinia and red root floaters and Amazon frogbit, those things as floaters. And then I want to get into more topic like growing fish out, like breeding rainbows and growing rainbows out in heavily planted tanks, which obviously will be dated. So there we go, guys. There's a waffle. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care. See you soon.